Hello. Today on this episode of Eros Mama, I have a very special guest, Alexandra Roxo. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. I'll tell you more actually, Ashley, cut this part. I'm going to do your official, I'm going to do your official intro separately. So this will just be like us jumping on together. Okay.
Sounds great. Okay.
Okay. We'll start again.
Okay.
All right. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Eros Mama. Today we have Alexandra Roxo. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. You are also a mama. You have a little girl, Lua Rose, who's 10 months now.
It's 10 months today. Yeah.
Wow. Happy 10
hmm
months to her
Yeah.
and to
Thank
you,
you.
10-month-old mama.
Yeah. Yeah. hmm
Very exciting. And before motherhood, you also were really into like the feminine embodiment work. You had an amazing book, Fuck Like a Goddess, which I loved.
Thank you.
Yeah. And let's see. So there's so much we can dive into when it comes to motherhood. And the way that the book is laid out is conception, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, babyhood, and beyond. So maybe let's roughly plan for our conversation to follow that transition into motherhood, and let's see where it goes.
Great.
Cool. Let's see. So first, how did you know you were ready to become a mama?
Well, I felt ready for quite some time. And that was a real big pain point for me because I felt like I was ready to be a mom, but I hadn't met the person that was ready and to go on that journey with me. And I didn't know, who the person was that I was ready to go on that journey with. So I had the desire, and you know, there was a certain amount of time where I put that desire aside and I presenced my career first. And it's interesting in retrospect, I would have done it differently. I
Mm,
do think that part of being a millennial was like there was something sold to us as women to go pursue your career, and like that was going to bring you like love and pleasure or fulfillment or satisfaction or whatever. Like that there is a place inside of us that could be filled by ambition and career. And
mhm,
um, I watched a lot of Sex and the City when I was a teenager. And so I really had that independent woman programming, which then led me into my spiritual path, which was very like feminist, but also divine feminine. Like I've been on that path for 20 years. I found that path of the goddess when I was like 19 and really uncovered my own spiritual, sexual, intertwining nature. Um, and it felt like, okay, I'm on my mystical solo woman journey. And I was in film and TV, and I wrote and directed an independent feature film, and I produced some other films, and I wrote some scripts, and I produced music videos, and did a web series that I acted and wrote and produced in with some other people, traveled around the world, documentaries. It was all really a like kind of fueled of women's voices and stories. And I really wanted to kind of move the needle around women's sexuality and spirituality through film and TV, which was really cool. And I love that aspiration. And eventually I heard this, like, you're supposed to go into helping people, like supporting people, guiding people. And I heard that in a medicine ceremony. And I made the transition career-wise. And there were a lot of other things that led there, like the two television shows that I had been working on that were hopefully going to get greenlit, didn't get greenlit. And it was heartbreaking because takes a lot to even get a TV pilot and to like get yourself in the place where you're like in the rooms with all these Oscar winning, producers and directors, and to get the, chance to prove yourself, but then to not get the next step was devastating. And at that moment I was like, well, is this my path? It must not be my path because it's not moving forward. And then I was like guided to create a healing business for women and a coaching business. And that was back in like 2016, so 8 years ago. Um, but all of that creating and hustling and, building is a little bit more of a masculine energy for, I'm kind of flattening it in a way. You could call it yang, fire. You could call it an energy that's very focused and driven. So it doesn't have to be masculine per se. But I think during that time, there was so much energy of building and focus in my body that was very pointed and directed that I wasn't attracting a man who was the opposite or was that. I was attracting the opposite of that. I was attracting characters who were like less driven and like more flowy and more like soft and like, wow, you're so cool that you're like doing this stuff and building this. And but they were not the people that wanted to have a baby. They were like the ayahuasca guy and the Burning Man guy, and I just did Sundance guy, and like, let me, just like those guys. And they were fun adventures, but not anyone who was ready to commit to have a child. So I had to go on my whole journey of, I was very in my feminine, but in this very fiery, creative, directed way. And then I needed to soften and I needed to slow down and I needed to take the heat off and I needed to ask myself, is ambition my goal? Like, is success and accomplishment my goal? Or do I want to have a family? Because they actually are very different energetics when they're living in your body. I'm not saying you can't have both, like you can, but opening to receive like the penetration of a man or of a sperm in your womb is a very different energy than going after something, right? And like, so for me, I went on a real journey of like, okay, I'm ready. I want to become a mom. I want to meet my partner. Wow, I need to slow the fuck down. I need to become more receptive. I need to um, cultivate a different side of my feminine, let's say. We don't have to put it masculine, feminine, but I need to cultivate a different side of my feminine that can receive, that cannot be the leader, that can be um, a little less directed and structured, which I was great, and I still am great at getting things done because I have that element of structure. So, but in those years where I was kind of transitioning, I wanted so badly. I was like, I'm so ready. I'm so ready. I'm so ready. I'm so ready. And I kept attracting those kind of flowy, non-committal guys. And I was like, fuck, I must not be ready because I'm attracting this not readiness. And so I just had to be patient. And there were many times where I sat and I said, like, if it doesn't happen for me, it doesn't happen for me, and if it's not in my karma this life, it's not in my karma this life. And I would sit and cry and I would release the desire and I would say a prayer. I would do a ritual and say, like, if it's not meant to be for me, let it be, let it go. Um, and and then, I met my now partner, and even then we had like a journey of a few years where I was like, okay, I'm really ready. Like I am really ready. And he wasn't. And so, we've been together almost 4.5 years now, and her daughter's 10 months old. So you can do the math, like that those years I was ready. And he was like, I still want us to get to know each other and like deepen. And I'm like, but I'm almost 40. So we've got to have a baby now. And he was just like, I trust, and that was a real battle because it was for me, I was like, I trust, and I'm also pragmatic in a way when it comes to like, I am nearing 40. So I don't have as much magical thinking around this, like, because there's a part of me that's like, if you're going to do it, Alexandra, why delay? So, um, there
Wow.
was a lot of patience needed on that journey for me, a lot of patience for many years, which made me really have to investigate my desire and ask, like, is this true? And can I release it? Can I surrender it? But it just stayed with me. It kept staying with me.
Wow. Oh my gosh, there is so much I want to ask you about this journey and also so much I can relate to. Um, I want to pull apart a couple themes before we keep going. One is that theme that you spoke to around like we grew up believing that our career would fulfill us.
Hmm.
I also felt like that. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be like the president of the US. My husband's going to be a stay-at-home dad. I'm going to, and the achievement would be the thing.
Right.
And and I love when you describe the shift of energy, like that it's a really different energy from like going out and creating and producing, even if it's in service of the feminine, which both of our
Yeah.
work is, it's like it can still be with a certain like forward
Yeah.
momentum energy.
Yeah.
And I love when you describe like okay, you had to soften back and receive and get into a totally different energy in order to welcome in this desire you've been holding.
Yeah.
So let's see well, first I want to hear when you met Eli, how did you know he
Mhm.
was the one or the one? If there's, I don't know if you believe in that. I don't necessarily believe in that. But how did you know he was going to be your partner?
Well, I had been practicing in the sacred intimacy work of that came from the teacher David Data and then was passed down to other students. So I had been practicing that work. And I had been practicing feeling what it was like to be with a strong masculine man in workshop spaces. So I could really feel the difference in my body of being with a man who was like deep and present versus like maybe spiritual but kind of flowy or disembodied, right?
Mhm.
So I had gone on this journey healing with the masculine, I say it in air quotes. I'd gone on a journey healing with the masculine, with my dad, with men in my past, not directly, but in my heart and in my body and in my psyche. And then I had begun to really open to like, well, what is like who and how and what are the qualities of um the masculine that most feel true and delicious in my body. And I got to experience that in different workshops, which was really cool. Standing in front of different men and breathing and feeling how, wow, this different quality opens me. This turns me on. This lights me up. This repulses me, right?
Mm.
I don't know. Have you been in some of those workshop
Yeah,
spaces?
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, so from that, I began to feel an imprint of what a deep present man was like. I'm like, oh, that's a deep present man. Wow. I just realized my computer is like the backdrop is I'm a little far away. That's okay. Um, um, so I was like, okay, I want this deep present man. Where is he? And I was living in LA and I was like, where is he? Where is he? And I was not experiencing a lot of that over there. It was like a lot of like the Burning Man ayahuasca type of guy who's like, super spiritual, but like can't be off their phone, is posting about themselves all the time on social media. Like
Mhm.
that's not what I felt to be delicious in my body. I felt like a
Mhm.
present, deep man who his presence was so powerful that like it would make me kind of like weak in the knees. And I knew that that was possible. So
Mhm.
anyway, when I met Eli, two different people like tried to introduce us we met at a friend's wedding and it was a whole thing. But he was still like dating he was finishing up a relationship at the time. So we didn't really connect when we first met. But then um later we connected, but to share about our work first
Mhm.
because he was like, oh, you do work in the world where you support people to open, to be in sacred space. And it was funny because at the time I was like, I don't want to talk about work with any man. I'm like, I'm here to either like open and not about work or not. Or I don't want to waste my feminine energy on any man. And I don't want to be deluded by a bunch of men in my space who are like giving me something, but not what I want. So I wasn't very clear at this time. I was like, I have dealt with the bozos. Like, we are not playing around here. Um, and there was this moment where Eli sent me a voice note. And to that, before that moment, I didn't feel like an attraction. I just felt like, oh, we could be friends or something. But then he sent me this voice note because we had been just like texting. And hearing his voice, I felt the depth of his presence. And there's this really funny and also great depth psychologist, or she's this Jungian psychologist, Dr. Pat Allen, who wrote this book that has a very cheesy title called Getting to I Do, but she's kind of amazing. And she talks about the difference between men and women's brains, not masculine, feminine, but men and women, and how men fall in love with their eyes and women fall in love with their ears, and that there's actually like a biological way that if we're as women falling in love based on what we see, we're falling in love from the masculine part of our brain, so to speak. Anyway, it
So
was interesting.
interesting. I can so
Yeah,
relate to that actually. I'm just thinking about it, I'm like,
she's
I also fell in love with my partner's voice, like the voice, the depth of that.
right, which is so fascinating, right? So there's
Totally.
something like primal and biological about that, apparently. Um, So when I heard his voice, like it stirred something in my body. It was like a deep stir. Like I could feel it all the way down to my pussy and in my heart. And it was like, oh, interesting. And then I was like, oh, wow. I didn't know, like, what was going to happen, but I was like, oh, right. This is a man who has cultivated the depth of his masculine presence. That's what I wanted. Like, I was in these workshop spaces and assisting and going deeper into these practices. And um, I was like, this is the kind of man I want who can go really deep with me. Like, not your average Joe or even just your average spiritual guy, but like someone who's like a deep seeker.
Mm-hmm.
So funny because, I had had some of these wandering mystic types, but they were like, maybe not ready to commit or whatever. And Eli has a little bit of that wild mystic inside of him. Like, and I didn't know it when I met him because I just felt the depth of his presence and he felt so deep and solid. But he's also really like wild and adventurous. Like, he'll sleep on a mountainside and climb on top of rocks and like, just like take off all his clothes and get naked in nature and like climbing onto a beaver pond and, just like. He's wild.
Love that.
He's also very wild and rebellious and
Mm.
is a total psychonaut and all of this. So it was like, I found this man with like this real deep presence and like really this power, but then who's also just like met me in this rebellious, like mystical nature of like kind of being a little like fuck the system. And I loved that. I found that to be really sexy.
Mm.
So anyway, I don't know if I don't know if that indicated like, ooh, he's the one, but I'm like, I had heard like you don't meet many conscious deep men out there on the town. And so I knew I had a rare one close by me. And I think there's some great
Spotted
teachers.
in the wild, a deep conscious man. It's like a white
Totally.
tiger.
Yeah. And I think like, that there are a lot of teachers out there now teaching men and empowering men and elevating men or deepening men or whatever. So maybe there'll be a whole new crop of them. but I do know like, yeah, like I know a lot of women who it's just, it's harder. It can be. I won't put any, anything out there that's solid, but I just know for me, I was like, okay, this is like really special that I've met this man. And I want to do it. I want to go for it. I want to be practice partners of loving. And I was much more quick to hop on than he was. But eventually, we both agreed like, yeah, let's do this together, which is let's be in a devotional path where we're essentially opening to each other, but opening to ourselves and meeting ourselves more than anything. And we knew we're like, we're going to do this work and fun and play with someone. And so you just kind of end up, I don't know, I think it's a little less magical than I thought. It's like, who can I choose to go on the ride with? You
Totally.
know, who wants the same kind of ride as me? Like, who's willing to go there? Um, and so maybe there's some of that. And I do believe in soul contracts too, but I ultimately believe it's a choice. And I think that we all come to a moment where we're like, I'm going to choose into this love. Like, there's no, if we're thinking of someone being perfect or meeting all of our qualifications, that's usually coming from a shadow.
Yeah.
So
It's
if
so funny.
someone's,
I've said that to James too. I'm like, I don't know if I believe in soulmates. I really believe that like we just choose people that are kind of want a similar life or a similar journey, and then we figure it out along the way.
yeah,
And in a way, that sounds less romantic than like, you're the one for me. But in a way,
right.
I think it's so romantic because it's like we're actively, it's not just a passive thing. It's like two people
Totally.
really choosing each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always say that to women who are like, oh, I want to call in love. I'm like, well, are you ready to choose someone who's completely imperfect
Yeah.
and not going to meet all of your qualifications because you're also going to be imperfect to somebody and
Yeah.
not meet all of their qualifications. But they're also going to fall in love with you and you're going to be sparkly and amazing, of course. But then one day you'll wake up and you go, wait, they're maybe imperfect too.
Right. Like we're both imperfect people bumbling along, trying to figure out how to love. That is
Yeah,
not the fairy tale. No,
exactly.
but it actually is.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
it is.
I love that story on how you felt it and how you knew. And I especially love the moment when you're like, I felt into different men's energy and noticed which one opened me. And what a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful practice for a woman. So any woman that's listening to this that doesn't have her partner, like that's a little nugget to take
Yeah,
in.
I lead women through that a lot. I actually had two clients last week who are just at the place where they're like wanting to call in love and that's something that I was also led by teachers to feel those qualities in my body and to like feel them throughout my day. Like you can be walking and kind of feel like, oh, what is that energy like in my lower back? Where I'm like, oh, just like leaning into this oak tree. As long as like whatever imprint you have from life, you can use. It's a little manifestation-y too, honestly, in a good way. Like I would have a friend, let's say, who would bring me this like very protective energy and like always open the car door, carry my stuff. And I just felt so safe in my body with him, like one of my besties who happens to be gay. Um, but very masculine. And I would just practice feeling that safety in my body and being like, yeah, this is the deep safety I'm going to feel with my partner. Just like it runs down my back and it melts my spine and it melts the front surface of my body. And so those moments, because what can happen is then you finally call in the person that you want to love, but like you don't have the capacity to let your nervous system meet them. Because it takes, especially if you want to expand past the type of people you've been with in the past, then you've got to do that expansion work. You've got to do the massaging open. Otherwise, you're just going to keep calling in the exact type of people that you have the capacity to engage with. So it's like you have to feel those little indicators of expansion that's guiding you towards something bigger. So it's like, wait, that's a depth of safety I've never felt. Okay, cool. Bookmark that, highlight that, then practice that. Because it's like anything in life, it's like just experiencing it once, it's like, cool, that could be a fluke. But if you want to like be in that space of being able to receive that consistently, then you have to open in a way so that you can, right? And that's a lot of nervous system work. And a lot of times we push away the stuff we want because we just we don't have the nervous system capacity to receive it. So anyway, that is a great practice which you can do. You can even do in relationship. If there's a quality you've felt from your partner or an energy and you want more of it, then to practice just feeling it in your body, something will shift.
Yes. Yeah, and becoming that which you want to attract. I
Mm-hmm.
want to zoom in on this moment you described earlier. Like you were ready for the baby. You were like, I'm ready to conceive. And Eli was like, I'm not sure, or I'm not ready yet. How did you
Yeah,
two navigate that spot?
it was really hard. We had gotten pregnant accidentally and I miscarried. And that sort of made my body, mind, heart, soul, all of it go, oh, it's time. Like, because like the wheels had gotten into motion. So after that miscarriage, it felt so painful. It was really painful. And then I was like, okay, I'm ready to conceive. Like, I want to try again in a few months. And it was like, whoa, we've only been together a year, like, but I just felt so ready all of a sudden. My body had just like kicked into gear. Um, During that time, what was needed was us creating a deep, secure bond. And we had some attachment patterns that were really dovetailing. And so, like, our bond kept going into these insecure patterns of both of us leaning out in different ways, or somebody not being available, the other one, just like we were in this attachment dance, which I would say it wasn't just anxious avoidant, it was disorganized in its own way. And some of our own childhood traumas were rising. And so we had to face those together. And I had done so much work and therapy and medicine ceremonies and processed through so much of my early childhood life. Um and yet I hadn't ever opened my heart so deeply to allow someone in. And so what happens when you have attachment trauma is like it's like you have a certain boundary that it's like, this is what's safe. And then intimacy asks you inherently to go kind of beyond that. It's like, hey, so let's bond with this person. And I think about it like even us being, no, not just us, but people that, let's say, don't choose into a deep bond earlier in life. Maybe it's because of career, but maybe it's also because they don't really trust that potential attachment because they haven't had a good imprint. When you're talking about just like straight up psychotherapy and attachment, most of the people that had a secure attached upbringing partner off early. There's a security in loving and in relationship and intimacy. So
Mhm.
statistically secure people are off the market very young.
Huh.
And so the people that are left, people that are working it out. So, it's interesting in that way because, and maybe those are people that are just like, well, career's my focus. Well, because maybe I didn't have the best imprint when it comes to love and safety and intimacy. So anyway, when we got together, we had to do a lot of like this kind of um sleeves rolled up, hands in the dirt work. It was like less sexy. I mean, we had like the sexy honeymoon, like magical mystical phase where it was just like, oh my God, this is insane and incredible. And then it was like, now let's get to work. And I think some couples don't get into that deeper layer of work until years later because it's like the stuff that's coming from the deepest part of your being. And some people, let's say, don't let that rise until later. There's like a lot of just masks and ways that we exist together that prevent that from coming up, right? But for us, we were like, hey, I'm in a practice of honesty and allowing the depth of my truth. I sit with this in ceremony. I sit with this in therapy. I know backwards and forwards what I'm dealing with. Here is what it is. We were both like, here's what I'm dealing with. Here's what I'm dealing with. Okay, interesting. Okay. And it was like a little bit of a gulp for me of like, gulp, do I really want to be in relationship with that? And that's another, consideration in a relationship. It's like, what are your shadows? What are the traumas, addictions, any of that
Mhm.
that you hold, that your lineage holds? Also, yeah, what are the gifts and what are the magical pieces? Of course. and looking at all of that, what do I want to be in a relationship with? Am I able to be in am I choosing into all of it? Because the thing is, I have to choose into all of it.
Mm-hmm. The
With a
full
person, you
package.
don't, yeah, you don't get to say, hey, I love this about you, but I can't choose into that.
Right. Or
Like
please
if
change
you,
that.
yeah, exactly. And so that's the problem, is that we get into these little bargains inside of ourselves. Well, he'll change that. Oh,
Mhm.
well, that'll go away. Oh, well, and really it's unfair to another person. What if we say yes to them? We have to just say yes, unless we say, hey, I'm a yes, like to this, and I gotta let you know this is uncomfortable for me. Are you planning on doing work around that? What does that look like for you? Right. So there's like obviously conversations. But so I do think for us we had some work to do, some soul work, some alchemy work, some creating a secure bond. And of course the part of me is like, I want it to be faster. I want to like have it all now. And it's the perfect timing. Like we created that beautiful, deep security. We did so much of that shadow work and like busted some of that out to the extent that I think now we know how to get through some like nasty, deep ruptures, like
Mm.
deep, like stuff that's like sticky from generations past that we know is here with us. Like we have gotten through some deep, deep, dark ruptures. And so I kind of love that for us as leaders and teachers and coaches. Like we've both dealt with complex trauma that is like things that we don't always talk about publicly, but that's gnarly in different ways. And we know how that manifests in the here and now moment, which is choosing away from love, not trusting love. So, when I or he can't choose into love, I'm like, we're just battling shadows. We're battling all of the shadows that we have that say like that are anti-love, that are
Mhm.
forces of
Mhm.
anti-love. And some of them are have a deep grip, and then they create parts inside that are protecting. And so we've done the spiritual side and the sacred side, and we love that, and that is both of our home, and we've done a lot of the therapeutic side and medicine work. And so for us the journey has been both, you know. I
Yeah.
hope, did that answer why we didn't, like how I felt about not having a
No,
baby?
no, it absolutely does. And I think it's a really important point that you brought up of like you're saying yes to the whole person and going on the journey with the whole person. And yeah, I love that. Let's see. And so
Mhm.
what was the moment when you're like, okay, we've done enough of the inner work, enough of the shadow work that we're ready to say yes to life? What
Mm,
was that moment like?
mm. Wow. Well, we had to come to a crossroads for a moment where it was like, are we going to stay together or not?
Mm.
That was really hard. Um, yeah, it was like, I was like, if we're not going to do this, I don't know if I can just keep waiting.
Mhm.
That was really painful. It was its own deep crucible because I just felt like, oh my God, I moved my whole life. And if this doesn't happen, I left LA and moved to Colorado. And I thought, God, if this doesn't happen, did I just fail on like 3 years of living? And had to really sit with that. And that was so painful, so, so painful. Um, and And then just again, surrender it, just like another fucking crucible of like, all right, and yet here I am, and yet I'm alive, and I'm well, and I'm healthy, and I've got great work, and I am creative, and I can always pull myself up again. I know how to pull myself up again. And so it's like, I can pull myself up again. And then he stepped in, he leaned in. He's like, no, let's do this. And I was like, fuck you, motherfucker. Putting me through hell.
So,
It took a few months to establish some deep trust of like, is this real? Are we really gonna do this? So it wasn't like just one day we're like, let's do this. It was like, okay, we're gonna do this. And then we had such a gorgeous time together in Europe. We had the really deep bonding trip and like just like danced and played and kind of like rewove our hearts together. after being in this liminal land for a while. And then after that, we were in. It was just like we had fallen back in love in a deeper way. Not that we were out of love, but like we had been just like at this impasse. And
Mm.
I think that these come to Jesus moments happen for different people in different in different ways in relationship, where it's like somebody has a new need in the space and like they can't ignore it, or somebody's changing. And there are these moments where it's like, in the South, we say, come to Jesus. It's like, well, you've got to come and like, just kind of like get down on your knees and be like, okay, here we are. What do we do?
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think those moments are so powerful for relationships. Like, one of the moments with James and I is when we decided to commit because we were just intimacy practice partners for 3 months. Like we were practicing conscious sexuality and intimacy, but we weren't in a committed relationship. And then I
Wow.
just got the hit and I'm like, I want to go deeper with you. Like either we're at a fork, I could feel we're at a fork in the road, right? Like we're either going to deepen into a partnership or this is the end of the road for us and I'm going to go find someone else. But not like an ultimatum, just like a truth of like, we are at an impasse here. Like it's
Right.
time for a choice.
Yeah.
And I remember he didn't want to make the choice. He was like, no, let's just keep it how we are. And, you know, and yeah, and I was like, no, like we can't continue as we are. So it's time to
Right.
make a choice. And that was a huge turning point. And it
Wow.
sounds like maybe you had a similar one around having a baby. Was
Yeah.
that what it was like for you?
Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love in both of these stories the way that we held the desire, for partnership for a baby and
Mhm.
invited our men into it.
Right. Which I've heard from a lot of women. When a
Yeah.
man is more identified with his masculine essence, it's just less of his impetus, maybe, you know. Um, so I've heard that from a lot of women who are with men who are like masculine. I'm not saying that every man, that's the thing, but yeah, it's a different practice when you're just driven by love and connection versus driven by something slightly different.
Yeah, totally.
Like
And
we're allowed to be different.
yeah, and a stand for love. And look, you made this stand for love, and now you have your little girl. I'm curious, once you did your Europe trip, you decided you two were gonna have a baby. How was the journey of conception? Was it easy, challenging, joyful, difficult?
Yeah. You know, I feel like there was a lot of pressure that I had put around conception and timing just because of the timing. And um, I was like, I was just really tracking my ovulation. And we got pregnant the fourth cycle of trying for the fourth month. And so that was really beautiful. And I was so grateful. But I was very, very anxious and nervous. What if we can't conceive? What if it doesn't happen? Like I was very anxious and nervous. If I could go back in time, I would be like just have a bit more trust in my body and knowing. But it's like I think the medical system really has put in a lot of women's minds, like if you're 39, like your chances are dropping. Like I feel like I had that in my mind and it was impacting me. And now I feel like if I were to try to get pregnant now, I would not be tense. I wouldn't tense around it like I did, which was like I felt this like I have my chance now, and therefore I need to like be strategic around it and really make sure that we're doing it on the right day. And um yeah, so it was beautiful. Like we had fun. We were like, okay, it's the day. Let's do it. Oh my God, oh my God. But then it's like also, okay, now we conceive. Now we have 2 weeks, 2 weeks to wait. Oh my God, the 2 week wait. Oh my God.
Oh my God, the 2 week
And I'm
wait.
just like, God, women that go through that for years. God, I'm like, how much alcohol are you drinking? How much like weed are you smoking? It's like, how are you dealing with the anxiety on the other side? I mean, mate, you're probably not doing those things because you think you're pregnant, but like, how the hell do you deal with the anxiety? I mean, because
Hmm.
maybe some people don't have a proclivity towards that, but even just like, it's just like that waiting and then getting your period. If you're not pregnant, and then you go through just like a deep sadness. I don't think men understand that either. I think, you know, to Eli, it's like another month we try and we're to go for it. And for me, it was like, oh, what if something's wrong with me? What if I can't conceive? Like, it was just like such a process. So I guess you had asked, like, kind of what the sexier parts, that definitely probably was the least sexy part of the journey for me, even though that was the part that involved actual sex, like physical sex. I would say that there was more tension around that for me versus like once I got pregnant, I felt so hot, and like postpartum, I felt so hot, just relaxed. And for me, like hotness and sensuality is relaxation. Like it requires relaxation. So when I'm in anxiety, and same with I see with my clients, I'm like, you're not probably feeling, because anxiety kind of disembodies you by default. So you're probably not feeling your pleasure. Like that type of pleasure requires relaxation. So for me, like once I got pregnant, I felt a lot more relaxation in my body. Once I give birth, I felt a lot more relaxation in my body, which equaled feeling hot, feeling good, feeling juicy. So I do think, yeah, that the conception and then just like the first trimester felt more like being in a chair pose in yoga, where I was like, I can do this. I love this. This feels so good. I got this, but also, oh my God, this is intense.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel you. It's funny. I was just writing the sex chapter of conception yesterday, and I was writing, I'm like, okay, in this phase of your motherhood journey, you're probably having a lot of sex, but it is also one of the hardest times sexually because all of a sudden sex is like for an outcome. It's like it's not just for like union and our pleasure. It's like we're trying to do something with our sex
Yeah.
to make it really like sticky and crunchy and
Yeah.
tense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And then you
I
got
like want to know what it was for you, but I.
oh, um, yeah. Well, I'll tell you the first time we conceived. It was on my birthday, the night of my birthday. My
Mm.
friends were joking. They're like, go upstairs and conceive your baby. And I was like, no, I don't know. I thought ovulation had already passed. But anyway, we went upstairs and we had this like really beautiful lovemaking. And there was just a moment when I swear I felt like the spirit of the baby. And I looked at James and he looked at me and I was like, yes. And like, we went over and afterwards we're like, whoa, we both felt that feeling. And so I was like,
Uh,
I was pretty sure I'm like, well, I think I'm pregnant. And then I took this pregnancy test before, like right when I was due to start my period, and it was negative. And I remember feeling so sad. And James tried to take me on a date to like cheer me up. And I was like, I'm gonna have 2 glasses of wine because screw it, I'm not pregnant. And I don't even usually drink, but I was so sad. To your point, like I was so thought I was. And then I went on this weekend and we did a mushroom journey with some of my friends, and it was this beautiful experience. Anyway, my friend, while she's on mushrooms, puts her head on my womb and she's like, I think you're pregnant. And I'm like, I'm not. I took a test. And she's like, no, I'm pretty sure you are. And so I'm like, okay. Then I get home the next day and I take another test. And it's positive this time. Turns out I was pregnant all along.
wow.
Yep, the baby
Wow.
just wanted to go on a little journey with us. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. I love that.
Yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, that was the first
Hmm. Hmm.
one. And the second one, I was I don't know. It's a whole story, but I want to hear more of your story. Maybe I'll tell you the second
Okay.
one another time.
Okay.
Let's talk about feeling sexy during pregnancy or feeling however you feel during pregnancy. How was it for you? How did you feel in your body and in your sensuality while you were pregnant?
I mean, I loved it. Most of the time I loved it. I mean, I just felt like such a woman. I felt
Mm.
like such a like this is what my body is born to do. I just felt so in that. I mean, the first few weeks, and then I had some morning sickness. I'm like definitely remembering like being on a flight and being in hell, just like nothing was helping the morning sickness. Like I was just like all the ginger candies, and I was just like, the flight was making it worse, and
Oh,
you
I
know,
feel
that kind of stuff.
nauseous just
Anyway,
hearing this.
I know. God, right. You went through it recently, and it's been a minute for me. So, um, but once that morning sickness passed, and luckily I didn't have like vomiting, I just had some nausea, but um into the second trimester, I just felt really good and energized, um and Eli celebrated my body the whole time. I mean, he still does, but he was just like, "Oh my God, you look so hot." And like as my belly was growing, he's just like, "Oh my God, you look so hot." And um he's I'm gonna cry, but talking about it, but he was just such an amazing partner the whole journey, just like everything I needed, massaging my feet and like just everything I needed, he would do, draw me a bath. And like, this is where it became like, there's a part of relationship that is like really polarized and spicy. And this was like a part of relationship that was just pure love. It's just
Mm,
like, it's about like this him creating this unconditional, like loving
mm,
space for our baby to grow in. And he moved us into a house and got everything ready and worked his ass off, like worked so hard. And I was just like so impressed with him on the journey, and just, he just really appreciated my body the whole time.
mm.
It was
So
like
beautiful.
so beautiful, so touching. And during the birth and after the birth, he fed me by spoon for like 4 weeks, maybe, like fed me food. And because it's really hard, I don't think it even tells you, but like in those first weeks, you're in bed holding a baby. It's really hard to eat things. It's like,
Totally.
you're gonna eat hot food over the baby's head, or you know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like my baby just wanted to be on my body the whole time. And so he would just feed me, and it was so beautiful. And
Oh,
yeah, it was
I
really,
love
really
the image of that. And I think that's such a beautiful metaphor of like postpartum time of like mama's feeding the baby or holding the baby, dad's feeding her. And
yeah,
I just love that dynamic for couples
yeah,
because, she's holding the baby and he's holding her.
yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah,
of course, he needs his own support of people that are also holding him. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, totally. But I think the third trimester I started to feel a little less mobile in the
a
last bit. I was like not feeling,
little more whale-like.
yeah, I mean, I was still dancing and stuff, and I danced sensual movement, sensual dance the whole pregnancy. Like I was on the floor, um, doing weekly classes or private sessions with my sensual dance teacher in Colorado, and like, in my underwear, like moving my belly, and she would help me just like to keep mobility in my back. And um, yeah,
So
yeah, but yeah. I mean, that I just feel like it's such a beautiful, beautiful thing to be pregnant. Like for me, it was. Some women hate it. Some women's experience is completely different. But for me, I felt just so fucking goddess-like. I was like, this is the goddess right here.
I
Yeah.
love that. Oh, I hope
Yeah.
every woman who's pregnant has a moment where she's like, I am such a goddess. I
Yeah.
remember I was at like the end of my second pregnancy. I felt like a huge whale. And I see this French guy and he says this French accent. I'm gonna butcher it, but he's like, "Oh, you're a woman in full bloom." And I was like,
Mm,
oh, thank you. Because I
yeah.
felt like a whale, but to be seen as like this full bloom is such a nice
Yeah.
reframe. So
Totally. Oh, it
yeah.
is. Yeah. Mm.
Let's see. Oh my gosh, we're almost out of time already, and there's so many more things so many more places we can go and things to explore. And um,
Mm.
let's see. Is there anything that's coming up for you right now as you're thinking about this journey into motherhood and like particularly in staying connected with your body, your sensuality, and your desire?
Mm. Well, I think one thing that I've talked about recently is just like this idea that postpartum, your sexuality is going to change for the worse, or, you're not going to feel connected to your body. And I think that's one of those kind of patriarchal lies, that sort of desexualizes women of like, now you're
Mhm.
mother, and so we're going to neuter you and like give you a role, and you're no longer allowed to be sexy,
Mhm.
or feel sensual or feel close to your erotic self,
Totally.
because, well, mothers can't be erotic because they're with children, and they're like, that would be, like, that's too confusing for a mother to be nurturing and erotic, right? Or, she has to be like a kind of slutty mom or something like that, right? Like in terms of archetypally, or something you would see in the media. It's like, but I think that that's a lie, and I think that we're like at our most bloom, like this man said, we're at our most full bloom. We're luscious and full after we give birth, or we can be, right? Not everybody's experience is like that, of course. But for me, I felt like this deeper embodiment because I had given birth, and this nearly 10-pound baby had left my vagina. And I'm still
Good job.
standing, and I just felt like, oh, I'm so powerful, and I'm so
Mhm.
resilient, and um even though it wasn't easy, and even though there was blood and pain and hemorrhoids and ripping and bloody nipples and all of the things, like, I just still, after a few months, I was like, that's when it kind of came online of like, this is actually the sexiest I've ever felt in my whole life, like the most embodied, the most alive. And I wish that women were looking towards postpartum with a potential for feeling aliveness, not with a sense of dread. And I
Mhm.
heard a lot of sense of dread. Oh, I'm going to be in bed. Oh, I'm going to tear. Oh, like I'm not going to
You're
sleep,
so
which is such a
exhausted.
common thing. Oh God, you're going to be so
Yeah.
tired. It was like, we were like, get your fucking misbeliefs out of my face. Like, we're going to live what we're going to live.
Not
And
my reality. Cancel, delete.
no, delete. So I'm gonna look at this time as really hot. And even when my pussy was healing and I'm not having physical sex, like the depth of intimacy and love drugs, oxytocin, serotonin that were flowing between me and my partner were so delicious, and just created this deep, deep, beautiful bond. And then when I did feel healed, there was this like, oh, our baby's asleep. She's now not napping for the first time off our bodies. Well, it took a little while, but that's okay. We have 30 minutes. And it just felt like putting this timeline of like, we have 30 minutes where we can connect. And like, instead of it being like, let's do the dishes and we need to email, which all that stuff is true and important, but it gave us this like greater drive to come together during that time and to find each other, and still does. I mean, it still does. I mean, man, when you run your own businesses, it's like, okay, we have 30 minutes. Do we like do the work we need to get done, or do we get naked or do some practice together or whatever?
Yeah.
um do we go into the realms of sacred loving, or do we get shit done? And so, I
Mhm.
think we probably do 50-50 because
Mm.
we have to get shit done too.
Right.
But I've been practicing putting not doing the laundry then, not doing the dishes then, not picking up toys then, or whatever, even though like that's what I want to do right when she takes a nap. I'm like, I got to do all this stuff. But I've been practicing like going, okay, I'm going to drop into my sensual body. I'm going to
Mm.
check in with Eli. Like, is he available? Or he's checking in with me. And then can we make this a time to connect, to go into some practice, even if it's not actual penetration? Because sometimes I'm like 20 minutes, I need a little bit more time to drop into my body. I need a little bit more. But it's like, oh, well, what we can do in 20 minutes is this, and like we are like, well, what would you like to receive in 20 minutes? Like what, or 10 minutes, right? Like what would you like to receive in 10 minutes? um and then creating that just point in our day. And so yeah, that's been such an erotic, beautiful time, I think, and it still is, of like rediscovery of my own sexuality, because also the maiden sexuality has sort of died off.
Mm,
all these preferences I had when I was younger and the things that I thought I needed in order to connect and
mm,
feel erotic charge, like all of these things. I'm like, oh, I don't really know if I need that anymore. Or I don't know if I have all this preferences in the same way.
mm,
Like they're more like waves that come and go, and like the deeper charge is there. So that's its own portal, right? Like a part of me is like, ah, but I liked having all of this, like, certain things that I loved or hated. And now I'm like, part of my own sexuality has matured during this time. So yeah,
I love that. Yes,
yeah.
that's that's so much of like the idea behind this podcast, this book is like, this could be the sexiest time of your life. And I really, to your point, I really think we like as a culture fetishize the maiden, use the mother and ignore the crone.
Mm,
And so to be a woman like you or like me, that's like, no, I am also an erotic being while I'm a mother. And like, I'm still going to find pockets and like prioritize our sensuality and my sensuality. It feels
yeah.
like a daily rebellion, I would say, against that cultural narrative. Um, and I
Yeah.
love, and gosh, if we have more time, maybe a follow-up interview. I want to dive into like what is the difference between maiden sexuality and mother sensuality?
Mm,
Mm,
great question. Oh my gosh, you could write a chapter on that, Megan.
totally. All right, we're gonna leave the listener yearning for that one. That might be a follow-up
Mm,
episode. But yeah, I want to thank you so much for
mm,
this interview. I love talking to you and hearing about your journey and how you describe like trusting yourself and your desire and your body each step of the way. Like I really, those are some of the things I feel just in hearing your story, how
mm,
deeply you trust and listen to your body along the whole thing.
mm. Totally. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Well, maybe a part two. And yeah, if you were to leave the listener with one, so imagine this listener is a mama to be, which is like one tip or one question. No, let's make it a question. One question for her to consider. What would you
Mm.
leave her with?
In your current life, what supports you to feel more deeply embodied, sensually alive, and in your pleasure?
Mm, love that. I'm taking that one too for me.
Okay, good.
Thank you so much.
Mm.